What is up, you guys? This is Will. Today we have a very special guest. I've been spending the past 7 months trying to get him onto my channel to share some incredible knowledge and insights that have not been talked about anywhere else. With over 4,200 NFTs, almost 140 sets, DannyBoyLIAC is one of the biggest VV whales ever. And if you've been using VV since 2021, you know that he is one of the best NFT traders on the app. In this interview, I asked him how to make money on VV, how he times his trades, when to take profit, his strategies, his Donnie, which is purchased from the VV market. We also talked about other stories about a different VV whale who is a female collector who used to own over 100 Donnies at one point, and why you should be worried about NFT taxes, and so much more. Guys, there is a reason why I spent the past 7 months trying to get DannyBoyLIAC on my channel. You will see why. This is the interview that you do not want to miss. As always, if you enjoy the content, please give this video a like. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and most of all, please subscribe now so that you don't miss out on actionable and valuable insights that will help you to make better decisions on VV. Let's fucking get it. Neil, I've been a fan of you for a long time, and to those who are watching, I've been trying to get our guest today on my channel since December 2021. So for 7 months, I annoyed the shit out of him on both Discord and Twitter. And now we're here, and there are several reasons why I had to get you on my channel and why I have to introduce you to my subscribers. Back then, I saw your name, DannyBoyLIAC, on every single listing. You were flipping a ton of collectibles. So many people were talking about you and how much you were buying and selling. Now we don't see your names anymore. We don't see your listing anymore because you are buying. Okay, so we will talk about that. So reason number two, what's crazier is you have 3,500 NFTs, 127 sets, and you did all of that without buying gems off app. You buy gems directly from VV in Australia, which makes it even more expensive. So getting to 3,500 is just fucking crazy. I wanted to know about that. And then last but not least, you recently started your own channel, your own YouTube channel. And personally, I think those videos are some of the most underrated VV videos ever. Some of them have terrible video quality, so I'll be able to give you some tips. But I will watch your video and rewatch them multiple times and take so much note because you bring so much value. No BS, no clickbait. So I can guarantee to anybody who's watching the video today that you walk away with so much knowledge and so much valuable lessons from. The reason why I'm doing these interviews is because if you were to go through your VV journey by yourself, then you are learning from one person, which is you, and that is a very biased perspective. But if you watch the guys who are day in, day out, thousands of transactions and their portfolio sometimes exceeding $1 million, within an hour, I can guarantee you that your knowledge will go up exponentially, and you walk away with so many lessons and mistakes that you will be able to avoid. So Neil, thank you so much for being here, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Of course, no problem. Thanks, Will, and mate, well done. You did wear me down. You got me here.
Yeah.
Mate, the only thing I would suggest, worse than following just yourself advice, is following the wrong advice. You do have to be selective. You know, my channel's there just to help. I don't care if people watch it or don't watch it. And I mean, that's the thing. I want to help the people who might inadvertently get stuck in a situation they don't think they're in, as opposed to putting something too flashy to gimmicky or clickbaity or anything like that together. So I will take your tips, but
all right. And I think that is the only tip that I can give you. The rest you have to give me, anything VV related.
We'll trade.
Okay. So to those who don't know about you, how would you describe yourself, and how did your VV journey started?
Well, the easiest one's my VV journey started with a friend in Australia. He'd been talking about it for quite a while, and it took me, I actually registered my first account. It had a lot of complications with it. I actually ended up losing it. I'm sure it's one of the ones inside of the 2.5 million count, but it's had no action on it. And eventually, after having enough conversations with my friend, I decided to check it out more. And you know, two 40-ish-year-old men talking about Batman NFTs is an unusual occurrence. And eventually, you know, the stuff is quality. And this is one of the really important things I want to impress onto people is this is the stuff. This is the quality stuff. So if people want to see Veve reach where it should on its journey, it has the assets, it has that side of it. And that's what happened with me. I just looked at them and thought, my God, these things are actually quite awesome. And, you know, when you get into the VR or the AR or whatever you call it, it's highly addictive. And what you're doing is collecting stuff that you want. You know, and that's how I fell into it.
Yeah. So were you a collector prior to Veve?
Look, I definitely yes. Back from in Australia, you know, in my youth, collecting, you know, Indiana Jones cards, Star Wars figurines. Like, I grew up in quite a poor family, so there wasn't a lot of you know, gifts to hold on to of any sort of value. But I did have that collecting side of me. I did like to grab stuff and store stuff. And my first effort ended up with, you know, quite a lot of cards that I traded at school, and, you know, were in not great quality, left underneath the house that got ruined. And then, you know, later on, as I sort of became a teenager, then an adult, I had picked up stuff that I loved at, you know, shops and auction houses. And once again, I moved around too much. You know, I spent a lot of time between here and overseas and in and out of houses. And I honestly wouldn't tell you how many houses I've lived in. It's embarrassing, but it makes it impossible to collect. And that's where Veve also hit the mark with me, because I can collect these no matter what. Do you know what I mean? No matter how catastrophic my life is, or, you know, if I'm having to move between countries and put stuff into storage areas, I can just keep my Veve collection on my phone. And that's really cool. And I love it.
Yeah. So I am on the same boat. When I first got into Veve, I was very hesitant to collect, simply because of my background. I've seen family members who collect furnitures, for example. The thing about collecting furniture is that they are heavy, they are big, and if you run into a financial issue, it's not easy to sell your set of furniture, right? And most of the time, you have to sell them at a very low price, simply because it's so hard to sell these things. So, you know, like Veve having the market and having that community is really game changing.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I think you could look at something like, you know, as a real life comparison to what you just said. Things are hard to sell. They're costly to sell. Do you know what I mean? Here, they're very cheap to sell. You pay the commission. You don't have to drive that sofa, you know, or that, you know, Edwardian chair off to the auction house, you know, which could be 400 kilometers away. Here, you just put it onto the market. However, there is a comparison a little bit in that, you know, some of the items are not automatically flippable. Do you know what I mean? So some of the items, particularly at the moment when, you know, it's in such its infancy, you have to wait longer. And there will be a time where, you know, if you're trying to sell a $10,000 or $12,000 item and you need that sale, there will be a point where you'll have to drop it down to very well below what it should be to get that liquidated. Because if you leave it around market price, somebody could jump in front of it, or there could be no buyer there.
Talking about flipping, I have a whole list of questions, but I am going to be selfish and ask my favorite questions, which is, last year I saw your name, DannyBoyLIAC, on pretty much every single listing. Why were you buying and selling so much?
Well, the first reason is strictly economics, and that is in Australia with the gems, we pay actually about $1.15 here. So I had to try and cover off the expenses for the not only the Apple fee, but the international charge. So to get in, I guess what I was trying to do was, well, first of all, I believed in the market. And then once I believed in it, I thought it could be something that, you know, if you looked at it and monitored certain behaviors and, you know, watched certain things, you could make money out of it. And I mean, at the time, people were making money. Everybody was making money out of it, you know, particularly leading up to the January bull run. I mean, you could throw a dart at the board and, you know, hit a profit. So, but like, there is a strategy, and look, I've made as many mistakes as anyone. Trust me. You know, one in particular, I'd bought Rizzo's cheap and had sold them too cheaply. So I'd gone out too early in the market. But you know, a lot of the other ones where, I don't know, for some reason people like to criticize or, you know, look at what I'm doing and find a problem in it. But, you know, over time, you can look back at it and say, well, that was actually the right time to get out. I've always been told, and, you know, my dad used to be an investor, and he always said, you'll never find the top. Don't expect to find the top of the market. Just be happy if you can get out and make money. Give you more ammunition to repeat what you've just done. But there is a patience in needing to stack the gems, which I really lack, and I'm very annoyed at myself for that. And you know, that is the true way to get ahead in Veve, if you have that patience and that discipline.
But I noticed that you were flipping a lot back in, like, throughout 2021. So before the January 2022 bull run. How did you time it? Like, what was your thought process behind buying and selling and that kind of stuff?
Okay, well, I mean, at the time, it was the Only the Clowns web page was, you know, still just an idea and was in its, you know, early stages. But what I'd done, and this is what I'd recommend to anybody who wants to do more than just collect one or two things, is created an Excel for what I owned so that I automatically knew what I paid for it. And then I was just setting realistic targets. You know, if I could turn a, you know, net 30%, then let it go, you know. And there were times where during those periods, during those periods where you could see things happening very, very quickly. And, you know, we're at a disadvantage here in Australia because a lot of what happens overnight. But also there was a period when I used to wake up about 7 o'clock, which must have been about like sort of getting near the end of the day in America. But when things would move, and they would move very quickly. You know, people were clearing out floors, and at times, if you could just try and grab something there, it was the smart play. So knowing how much you spent for it, you could work out what you want for it. And if it went up and down, that's your best case scenario. If you get back in, you can recharge that gun and buy that same NFT and do that again. That's where you can actually really make money. If it just keeps going up and up and up, you go from the opportunity gets lost and gets moved over to somebody else, the person who purchased your NFT. So that's where you can actually live with the regret. You know, I've traded stocks as well, and the one thing I compare it to is like 1,000 paper cuts. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter where you buy or sell, the market's going to move and improve that position. You know, if you sell and it keeps going up, you're going to kick yourself for not holding on to it. Well, you shouldn't. You should reward yourself with, hey, I made 30% there.
So is 30% your benchmark to take profit?
It's a good question. Look, I think it would depend on the input cost. So like if you've got something small, I always say Mermicorno for something small, but if you've got something like that and you've paid 20, 40 gems, I think double is what you're talking about, you know, because you're going to have to warrant recording that. And, you know, that takes time and effort. So the videos that you were talking about before, that's some of them that are in my stable, and there's not many of them. Look, there is the tax one, I think, is very, very important. And I think people have to work out what their government expects from them. And if you haven't created an Excel for your catalog of items, whether they're your previous activity or what you're holding on to, I strongly suggest everybody do it. It took me ages to do up my one, but you really need to know what you've done. You have to go through your transaction history. So if you bought something for 20 gems, it's not worth selling it for 26, you know what I mean, or 28 to clear the commissions, and make 6 gems and have to spend so much of your time creating that entry, because that entry needs to be recorded. Now, I know a lot of people think that it doesn't, but it does. And I think from my understanding, and as always, do your own research, but in America, every single entry, regardless of its value, has to be recorded. In Australia, it's above $500, which is roughly 380 gems. But here, and this is another important reason why I've said this, the gem has to be stable. So for our tax department, that value is determined. So you have to equivalent that to the US cost. That gem has to be constant. And this is where, Veve is going to get caught inside these requirements, because that gem has to always equal $1. Otherwise, the whole of the Australian, the rules for the Australian tax don't work out, because it says 500 Australian dollars. So what is that in gems if it's variable?
Yeah. So talking about tax, I was going to save that section for later on, but since you mentioned it, I think your most recent video is the video that everybody has to watch, because you talked about a really interesting point, which is the fact that usually when we think about taxes, we think of tax as the percentage of profit, right? But then now the Veve situation is so interesting, and I have some notes here, so I'm just going to read from my notes because that'll be easier. You can buy an NFT off app for 2,000 US. Let's say that I pay you 2,000 USDT, and then you transfer a collectible, like the Todd Batman, right? For me, when collectible transfer was still available. And let's say that Todd goes to 10K, like 10,000 gems, like it did at one point, it went to 14,000. And when I sell the Todd for 10,000 gems, hypothetically, let's just say that I can cash out $10,000 in profit. Then if I'm in a 25% tax bracket, I'm paying $2,500 in taxes, right? Because my cost is zero, because on Veve's system, because you transfer the Todd to me, a cost is zero, right?
Yes.
When in fact, if I were to factor in the original $2,000 of cost that I transfer to you off the app, then my profit would have been $8,000. Then I would be paying $2,000 in tax instead of $2,500. And
anytime you transfer in, you're going to have to be able to prove that. So this is where I think people are going to get into areas they're not expecting. So if you've bought that through some arrangement, through some group, you have to prove that, because that's how tax works. What did you pay for it? What did you sell for it? That's the basic principle of capital gains. You take off any cost, which in this case is commissions, and the difference is taxable. So in America, the main differentiation is whether you've held that NFT for a year. If you've held it for under a year, it goes onto your personal income tax. If you've held it for over a year, it's a flat 28%, right? But being able to prove what you paid for that, you just can't go into the ATO and say, the IRS in America, and say, I bought it off Dave for 2,000. well, who the hell's Dave? You're like, oh, he's in the chat. You know, I text him and, you know, this guy, he escrowed it. I'm like, well, who the hell's that? Who's the other guy? Who's the middle guy? This is where it's going to get really, really funky if people don't stop and think. And what I mentioned in the video is, and this is where people have to just take a second. You know, I'm not the devil. I'm not creating these tax rules. They are there. If you want to flout them and do nothing, then so be it. But just remember what Veve is a big database. All your information is recorded, and that's what your local tax department may eventually be looking at. They may know every single transaction, and they'll look at that and say zero transfer in. Right now, if you choose not to populate those forms on your tax return, then you could imagine if you're in quite an advanced tax system, you'll get a knock eventually on your door saying, mate, you haven't paid your taxes and we're going back over 3 years. And, you know, if you've got that situation, and it's even worse when it's much closer, like just say you paid $5,000 for something that you sold for $8,000, but you transferred that in, right? So it was worth, say, 6.5, and you paid, you know, say 5,000 USDT. Now you physically paid that. And that may be from a wallet that you have online that the government knows about it, and it shows an account, you know, payment going out, a transfer going out. But you can't prove that that transfer going out was for that item. There's no connection between the two. This is where you need the paperwork to be able to say, no, that was for the purchase. You need to be able to go and get a receipt from the party that you purchased from. Now that party is going to 99.9% be anonymous. They're not going to give you a receipt for what they sold it for, because otherwise they're up for capital gains on what they've done. So this is where you're going to get left holding the bag. And if you've paid a lot and then you've only sold it for a small margin and it's an expensive item, like in that case where you've paid $5,000 and you've sold for 8,000, you only made, you know, 2,000 gems. But when the tax department looks at it, it looks like you've made 8,000 gems.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're at a loss because of tax.
Yeah, I think you are doing a great job by putting the formal perspective into a very informal space, simply because if we think about the demographic of NFT and Veve users, people come from the physical collecting background, which you mostly collect and you don't really sell, right? So you collect comic books or toys or whatever, and you don't think so much about selling. And people come from the NFT space, which can be all over the place. But at the same time, we need to also think about the fact that Veve is a partner of Disney and DC Comics and Universal, and those companies, Coca-Cola even, and USPS, they would not want to work with a partner that has problems with the IRS or, you know, some investigation related to taxes, right? And because
100%.
Veve is a centralized system, they track every single transaction and, you know, on the blockchain as well. So that makes it even more complicated and interesting and necessary to think about, that many
100%.
people haven't thought about.
And look, one of its partners is the USPS. You know, it is going to be aligned with the government. If you want to go down to your local collectible store or to, you know, a swap meet, and you want to buy a physical Todd, you want to pay cash for it, you want to pay, you know, any sort of crypto coin for it, and they'll take that. That's awesome. You can buy that. And you know what? Nobody's going to know you bought that or when you sell that, right? But that's not what Veve is. Veve is a financial market. So when you buy that, it says, you know, a whole bunch of zeros and ones that equates to your account. It goes from account A to account B. Now, at the moment, not all accounts are known. You know, pretty much no accounts are known. So if you're account A, you're going to get known when you go to KYC. If you want money out of account A, that's where you have to attach it to your name. So, okay, Will owns this, right? Then the government says, okay, well, that has to be connected to Will's tax return. Now, just say you have 5 accounts because you were trying to get multiple drops or whatever. There's no difference to the government as to whether you're buying or transferring from yourself or transferring from another nefarious unknown party, right? So it just looks at that one account. So I'm telling people maybe some of their smaller accounts, they might have to work out a strategy of how to get out of that position that they created, because they could have a lot of very much one-sided accounts or transfers on those accounts, and they may not be worth bringing into the KYC side of it, and then they have to work out how to get around that. And I'm not proposing strategies for that, but it's just people need to look at the records and say, well, what's there? And if you've traded your way up to a few big items, and let's take the Rizzo for example, and you sold one Rizzo, you transferred in, you clear at $8,000 tax, and you're adding that onto your personal tax this year. Look, I think the other important consideration for people to think about is at the moment with MTL, there is no actual validation of that $1 US, right? Because you can't cash that in. So there might be a period where, like a grace period, where you could say, in Australia, where our financial year finishes 30th of June. So, I mean, if MTL is not in by 30th of June, you probably don't have reporting obligations as yet. They'll still always be there, but you can't physically cash that gem in for anything at the moment. So I don't know, people need to look at their own situations, but yeah, they might look at some accounts and go, oh my goodness, if this guy's right, I'm going to be up for $12,000 in additional income to my tax return, and I've hardly made anything on that.
Yeah. And then especially you mentioned collectible transfer, and how in the US, at least, you are taxed. I don't remember the exact number, but if you transfer like something that is worth more than $5,000, I don't know if it's $5,000 or something like that.
Yeah, it is.
And that is a donation, and I get taxed, right?
Yeah. So, like I said in the video, this has a historical reason for all these really strict rules with collectibles, and that was, rich people and big businesses were, buying a vase for $50,000 and selling it for $500 and claiming capital loss and not paying $49,000 on their other taxes. They could sell it to their wife, sell it to their brother, whatever. So the government cracked down on it and said, no, we're not happy with this the behavior in these collectible markets. This is when it was a physical market. So they have these rules now, so that if you had a $50,000 vase in your house and you give that to another party, that party has to be a registered charity to be able to have that $50,000. Well, if you bought that vase for $5,000 and it's worth $50,000, your capital gain is $45,000 on that vase, whether you like it or not. If you give that vase to somebody, that doesn't actually zero out your capital gain, because there was a commercial or non-commercial transaction at that point. Now, if you can prove that it was worth $50,000 and that charity was capable of taking a donation of that sort and using it for its charitable purposes, then you could establish with the government, and you have to go get a value out. It's ridiculous that you don't have to pay that capital gains. If you look at that from an electronic perspective on Veve, you've got something, you've transferred it out because you've got a Bitcoin or a crypto deal done on the side. How does that look on your account? You've transferred out something you're not allowed to transfer. You're not allowed to give it to that person for free, and that's how it looks. So you have to say, oh, hang about, no, I got 1 ETH for that. From who and where's the record? Oh, I transferred out on this day. Well, what's the connection between that transfer and, or that transfer in and this transfer? You need a contract of sale.
Yeah.
This is where I'm just worried people might not be considering, because this, you come into this because you look at it and you like the NFTs. You're not thinking about taxes when you're buying your first Batman. Nobody is. But if you've been getting addicted to it, you've done 10, then 20, and then 40 transactions, and you've been wheeling and dealing a little bit, you better stop. Just have a look at where you're at. And I'll say to anybody who's been buying this stuff off market, and sick of hearing me saying it, I don't need to keep saying it. I've got friends who do this sort of stuff. I'm not trying to be a judgmental sort of person. I'm just trying to say, guys, be careful. Go and ask that person for a receipt. If you can't get a receipt off them now, you ain't going to be able to get a receipt off them when you're doing a tax audit. Do you know what I mean? And if oh, I'm not issuing a receipt, then consider what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Veve didn't have that technical resource to build out, because if you remember, for a few months last year, they had to close the marketplace. So many transactions happened off the app, right? And then now cash out hasn't been implemented for so long. I think that they acknowledge the off-app transactions. They don't encourage nor discourage it. So off-app transactions now looks like a band-aid. But to your point, that band-aid can make your wound worse if you don't take it seriously, right? If from that perspective. So I think since we were talking about cash out, in one of your not the most recent video, but the one prior to that, you mentioned how the business model of Veve is I don't know the exact word to use for it, but the thing is, if I put in $1,000 to buy 1,000 gems, that is not $1,000 anymore, because Apple is taking $250, right? But then if I want to take that money out, then Veve, I know that I have a 10% fee or whatever, but even then Veve, so if I buy 1,000 gems and I don't do anything, and I want to take it out, then Veve will have to supplement that with their profit. So correct. I think you raised a fantastic point with the fact that Veve has to have enough profit to cover that weird gap that the fact that they are on. So I know that many people said, oh, why is there no marketing? The fact that Veve is on the Apple App Store and Android App Store, that is the biggest marketing right there. That's like 30% company revenue going to marketing right there.
Yeah. Look, the web page is a very important step. Look, MTL and interoperability and the web page, they're the three things that are very crucial at the moment. And the frustration is real, and it's there, and it's completely understandable. For me, with Veve, I look at the company and I'm in awe of the achievements of what they did in being able to secure this intellectual property. I love the simplicity of their business idea. However, I do think some of the times they get caught a little bit out of their depth. And you've got a guy who's successfully run a small little franchise of comic book stores and a computer guy. They're a great partnership, but what is their experience inside these areas? As they try to build, they can either learn or in-house experts, and in-housing experts cost money. And this is strategies that they need to work out as to what's best for them in the long term. But some of the stuff they're going to get into these compliance areas and just have no idea, because there's a big difference between selling comics and in New Zealand and then having an international trading platform. So I think we have to give them some time to learn. I know people are going to react to this. Oh, they've been promising, and look, what they're doing is not easy. But I think what they need to do as well is just show some of their effort in something material that people can see. In the MTL, it doesn't have to be for all people in all circumstances. They could consider switching on one market. You know, they would have to be, if they look ready to go online, you know, in the next few days or next few weeks, they'd have to have approval for some of the markets already. Do you know what I mean? That are sitting there dormant. Now, we know the balancing act that they have to achieve, that they don't want everybody rushing for the door and selling off all their NFTs for below what they want to try and transfer that into gems. But I mean, if people are looking to do that, they're not VV people. They're just opportunists that are trying to, you know, grab some money and run. You know, whether they're people who have gem stacked through botting, or have sitting on significant profits because they've bought the cheap gems from the bots. And this is where people have to remember, I mean, those gems, they aren't getting mined. They're coming from bot activity. The people selling them, the people fronting, the people escrowing them, they're allowing that door to open up. Right? They're allowing that complication. And then you're going to have this situation where some people are going to be like, well, I'm buying gems for 40 cents. I've got two ideas with that. I can either go and buy an expensive item, hold on to that expensive item and sell it later. And I've only paid 4,000 when it's worth 10,000. Or I'm going to buy those gems, pay 4,000 and then try to cash them out. So VB has to stop that. So that's not because I want them to stop that. That's because that's a risk to them. They can't have these people arbitraging gem opportunities. Otherwise, it effectively will sink them, or not sink them, but it'll just drain out their cash faster than what they would hope, because they have to balance the cash flow. And this is where it is in this sort of small company trying to become a big company. And, you know, there are alternatives. I mean, they could go to Disney and go to DC and say, guys, 10% share each, you know, 20% share each, whatever. You know, there's a classic part in the Facebook movie, you know, where, what's his name? The singer who plays the role, and he goes and says to them, you know,
Justin Timberlake.
Justin Timberlake, yeah. There you go, perfect.
You can he's my favorite.
100% of a small company or own a small percent of a massive global company. And Vive's at that stage, and I'm sure that they are getting offers thrown towards them. And, you know, some of the stuff in respect of how they act and how they operate, it still does have, and I'm not trying to be too critical of this because I like this at the beginning, but it still has that small company mentality. You know, they have to be very careful with what they do and who they consort with, because, you know, people like to sort of say, oh, but they turned a blind eye to this. Well, they weren't publicly doing anything, but they weren't certainly approving this sort of stuff. And like, they're under no legal obligation to honor any of this sort of stuff. I mean, I'm sure under the terms of trade that there's many, many areas inside of that where they're like, well, we can quarantine this activity and we don't have to acknowledge it. We don't have to reward it, that's for sure. But, you know, the guys have to work out how quickly they want to get up and the pitfalls of growing the company, because everybody knows the first 5 years of company is the most dangerous period.
Yeah. And I think David is probably having a really hard problem to solve, because previously he has stores, right? Physical stores. It's very easy on paper. You come in, you buy products, you come out. But then moving from stores to platforms and marketplaces and stuff, that's when these kind of things happen. So I'm very glad that you raised those points, and also the fact that you mentioned how Recurve, for example, they are backed by venture capital, right? So they have lots of money compared to Veve. So they have that money is one thing, but they also have that expertise coming from those venture capitalists, those VC firms, which help them. So even though they're not doing well because they don't have the IPs that Veve has, that you know, Veve has David, Afid Khan, and Dan, really strong team, lots of great IPs. So I was certainly frustrated at how long it took them to implement MTL, But after talking to you and some other people in the community that really understand the product and really understand these behind the scene problems that the team is going through, I can understand why it is taking so long. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that you are talking about these things.
Yeah, and this is where, Veve has to be careful, because exactly how you just said, what Veve really is the intellectual property that it has. It doesn't have any of, when you're talking about capital, this venture capital coming, what venture capital brings in is also a regime, a very strict operational regime, so that, even something like social media is very, very heavily monitored, right? It goes through protocols and behavioral observations to make sure things that shouldn't happen don't happen. And you look at the very top level, like the Cokes and the Apples and that sort of stuff. There is a reason why they do and behave the way that they do. It's because of very, very awareness of their liabilities, their obligations to their partners, to themselves, to their shareholders. And if you're sitting at Recur, right, you've got everything behind you. You've got the big engine. You're ready to go, right? You don't have the IP. Who's got the IP? Well, these two guys sitting down in New Zealand have it. Well, what do you think they're doing right now? They're looking at what Veve does to try and find a hole in the operation, right? What can we do? Can we go to Disney and say, hey, look at what those guys are doing. They shouldn't be doing that with your IP. And this is where I think, Dan and Dave and Veve itself have to look at, if they're consorting with these people who are running these black markets, or if they're, promoting or being on pages of people who are, selling cheap jams, well, that presents a massive operational risk. That to the biggest part of Veve, which is the intellectual property. Veve needs to be very careful with its own intellectual property, because big companies aren't going to trust Veve to run their intellectual property if they have no respect for their own intellectual property. So they have to make sure the Veve logo is being used appropriately and commercialized appropriately, and they have to be very, very careful with what they do, because when you buy and sell an item off market, and let's look at the partner statute, because that's Disney, that's the Grail, and it at one stage was at $30,000 or $40,000. Now, when you have it at $40,000, but you want to buy it for 20,000 in ETH, right? That deal costs Disney 6.5% of $40,000, right? That's one deal, one loss. And you're like, oh, it's harmless. I'm like, you don't understand. What you're doing is taking away the income from the person who's providing the intellectual property rights. You're effectively like operating an illegal DVD store right in front of the bloody DVD store. And then, saying, oh, I love Veve and I'm a part of Veve and listen to me about my Veve stuff. I'm like, are you for real? Like, that money needs to go not only, well, Disney doesn't need the money, but Disney will be very annoyed when it doesn't get the money. Veve needs the money. That below that 6.5% is Veve's cut for the commission. You've cost Veve that money, and Veve needs that money, right? It needs to add that to its operational profit so we can put on mineral resources. It can do everything. That's one transaction. There could be 10,000 of those transactions. There could have been 100,000 of those transactions. And if you look at how much money these people are stealing from Veve, then you've got to consider Veve's not Disney yet, right? So you're wanting to see the company succeed, and you're eroding its operational profit. Like, it's absolute madness.
Yeah. And since we're talking about Veve being careful, the two topics that I didn't really understand. So the reason why I started making YouTube videos is because I was terrible at buying and selling collectibles. I was terrible. I didn't know much about the Omi tokens. So through these videos, I have to do research. And that's when that's when I could really understand what is going on behind the scenes and underneath the surface. So the two topics that are related to your point, um, that I talked about in my previous video, is the fact that the reason why VV buyback hasn't happened is because it's obviously they don't want to make VV going from a utility token to a security, right? And I think people need to understand that if they were to go that route, and when the rules are not clearly defined, then they are risking all of their IPs, because I bet like nobody would want to see VV being under investigation for messing up with their tokens, right? That is a red flag for companies like Coca-Cola
Yeah.
and Disney. So I can really understand why they paused buybacks, and that was a great decision to do so. At the same time, the second topic is, why isn't the Omi token listed on Binance and Coinbase? And that was my best performing video, and in that video I talked about how VV is a utility token without any utility. So if it were to get listed tomorrow, sure, like there'll be a pump 100%. But after that short euphoria, people will realize that, they'll ask themselves, can you buy any NFTs using Omi? No. Maybe a few, but nobody's buying. Can you buy any
Yeah.
VV NFTs using Omi? Does Omi get burned? Those kind of question. And the answer is absolutely no. And then people were dumped, right? And
Yeah.
that will be it for the Omi token. That's why VV and Ecomi have to be so careful on so many fronts, not just collectibles and not just, yeah.
100%. Right. So understand that inside, and obviously I'm not privy to the details of the contracts they have with their intellectual property holders. However, you can assume that there's a impropriety clause. So you make a big commitment to, or you want a big commitment from these companies, and they make a commitment to you. However, underlying that at all times is, if you bring our name into ill repute, we're out. It doesn't matter. So yeah, 100%. They can't get caught in some sort of regulatory investigation, SEC or whatever region that would be in. So, and this probably has a little bit of a line back to the MTL. And this is where people, I know we're going to get hounded for saying this, but may need to be patient, because VV, they have to draw a long line. And this is where people have to look at it as well and say, what do you want from VV? I mean, do you want VV to be like the Netflix, which, has been thrown around, the Netflix of collectibles? Now, if VV can achieve that sort of status, and let's face it, they're in pole position, they've halfway completed lap one and everybody's just run into their cars, right? So they are well ahead. They're in the most likely success position. There are a lot of hurdles they have to get over. Monetary is one of them. Operating and controlling the intellectual property, that's another one, right? But they have to stay very, very clean, and be at that point where none of this stuff is happening that could get back to Disney. And these sort of secondary markets, they're a little bit of a fly swat. Do you know what I mean? But if it becomes a big enough issue, Disney will get involved. That's what you don't want. You don't want to be giving any sort of excuses, or creating any risk for this company. If you love this company, you want to see it succeed. Now, the good news about it, if they get past all these hurdles, then you have to remember that if Disney takes its position in behind VV, and I think a lot of people realize maybe 5 or 10 years, Disney's going to do what Disney wants. Disney did what Disney wanted with Netflix, right? So VV is that first step. For me, I would think an equity sale, securing a long-term partnership would be a great idea. But that's a decision for the directors to make. However, if you look at a long-term view on Veve, as opposed to just trying to get some money out right now, what you want is for Veve to do the right thing. You have to remember the group that's in here now is not the end group. It's probably only a very, very small fraction of the end group. Veve could literally 100x its member base. It could 1,000x. It really could. So what it's doing now is getting itself set for a big expansion. And that's why they're not advertising, because they're not ready. They can't have, tens of millions of dollars coming every day via the Apple app. They need to have that spread out, and particularly into the Omi in and into the web page in, where they get dollar for dollar, right? They need to have that there. So if you believe in Veve, you have to just be a little bit patient, because, if you have that Todd, right, and it's sitting at 2.7 right now, it's or whatever it is today, it's the lowest that Apple has hung for a long time. And it has the history of Veve more so than just the character, right? It is great that it is first Batman, but it also has that add-on that it is first Veve, right? So it's historical to the people that are using the app. So that's why it becomes this sort of iconic piece, right? But now if you have one of those, you can look at trying to sell that now for 2.9 or whatever, right? But if you have a longer term plan and you think, I really love owning this piece of memorabilia, this piece of nostalgia, this piece of history, then if you're taking a 5-year look at it, there is no way that Todd is going to be worth 2.7 in 5 years. It's either going to be worth nothing because some of the hurdles that are in front of Veve are too big, or the infestation below it brought it down, which I don't think is really a risk, because they've gone so far that they could literally sell off 10% for a lot of money, right? And just grab that extra, capital and extra expertise in. So I don't think that's a risk. But if you look at it from, regardless of whether they're owning the whole thing or in partnership down the track, I mean, if that's the extent of the amount of those Todds, then the value of what they are now has nothing to do with what they will be down the track. And people are going to want them. People from every country, whether that's France or China or, Vietnam, people are going to want that. And 7,500 is not a lot to spread around the world. And that sort of desirability, the potential for this stuff, it really is. And people talk about sort of life-changing as a values. I don't think that this stuff is not included in that. Do you know what I mean? Because what you want is to make sure that particular statue or that particular NFT doesn't come out anywhere else. Do you know what I mean? Because the risk to it is, if Disney left because they weren't happy and then they released 50,000 of them, that's going to devalue this one, right? If that partnership stays, and this is a very long success story, my goodness, some of the stuff that's on this app, you have to stop and think about it and go, wow, I'm in here, and yes, it's frustrating. You can't get your money out, and there's other stuff going on that shouldn't be going on, but you're in here and you're able to buy that. Now, fast forward 5 years, what do you honestly think that Todd could be worth?
Yeah.
If Veve is a Netflix and that becomes the name synonymous with collectible trading, it is the trading market, and all of the other IP flocks in, as it will, because they're going to go towards the sort of brightest light. So if that is Veve, and Veve is the brightest light right now, these sort of stuff, when we're talking about, and I've estimated, I think there's roughly, somewhere between 150 to 350,000 people. There could be 100 times that easily in 2 years once the MTL is sorted, and they're ready to push out. Because when it does go, it's going to go. It's going to have celebrities talking about it. They've had a history of celebrities talking about it, and it pushed along quite far. But here's the problem: they've gone onto their pages and said, "Oh, look at my Batman, and look at this stuff," and they have the most perfect vehicle for it, because these sort of AR NFT things, they're the best advertisement. Who cares about putting it on a channel 10 or channel whatever in America? You can have some guy like a courtside basketball player and have his Batman there, you know what I mean? That's the sort of stuff that's going to bring this to the world. But the people who started with this, the very early ones, they've probably copped a lot of flack because of the MTL, because the VV people will flock in there and say, "Oh, you told me to buy these bloody Batmans and now I can't get my money out. It's a scam," or whatever. So they're not going to push back out for that level until they're ready. I think people have to be patient with that, because when they are ready, this could just
we are not ready.
explode.
When they are ready, we are not ready for that.
We're not ready for that, no.
Yeah.
No. And I think that would be the web page is definitely a prerequisite to that, 100%. And the MTL, you know, nobody's going to refer people onto Veve until the MTL is sorted.
Yeah.
In some respect. Do you know what I mean? Like, you tell your friends about Veve still? Like, would you tell your friend to buy a $7,000 Rizzo?
Yeah,
you know
that's the one video that I'm editing right now. I explain why Veve stopped growing, and I think I got it from your video. It's the fact that people stop referring their friends.
100%.
Right? Yeah, so I got some friends into Veve during Disney Go to Moment. So, and some of them got really good collectibles like R2D2, those kind of things. And I kept telling them, "Oh, the company is saying that cash out will be available in December and then January," and then keep going on. They kept asking me, and I ran out of answers because of that kind of stuff. So I do have a question on cash out for you.
Yep.
And how much time do you have left?
I'm just sitting here. I've got a cup of coffee. Okay. I'm right. Keep talking.
Oh, perfect. Because I have so many more questions. If you don't mind.
No,
so when cash out is available, are you gonna cash out maybe 10% to prove to your family that, hey, I'm not crazy buying these unicorns and Disney princesses?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly my mum, who is an accountant and, you know, has been like, "Oh, just be careful, don't put any more money in until the thing." I'm like, you know, you get past the point where you're sick of sort of arguing, saying, "Look, they're not going to be able to get this IP, you know, and fool all these people," because you look at the staff size of Veve, there was probably more lawyers attached on the Disney end for signing and preparing that contract than there are people inside Veve. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
You don't get past those gates easily. So there's no way that Disney would have allowed this stuff to happen if they weren't 100% sure of the pathway that would have to be shown by Veve to get this sort of stuff. So look, I think it's very frustrating. I don't refer anybody in, and I wouldn't, because, you know, Veve has to satisfy, even though I'm 100% believer in it, the fact is, I don't want to have to deal with, this is what you would have dealt with. Hey guys, look at this golden moments. They're like, "Oh, look at all this money, these gems has gone up so much. You know, Will, you're a legend. This is great. Thank God you got me into this, you know, blah, blah." And then, you know, it runs past and like, "I want to get my money out." Then it's like, "Will, what have you done to me?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we just, I think Veve is more than aware of that. Do you know what I mean? And that's why they're taking this pause. And that's really what it is. It's a pause. It's a plateauing for them to get in and get everything right. Because they need to have it all right before they jettison up. You know, anytime you sort of become that big blip on the radar, there will be people, other competitors, trying to, you know, bring you down, and they have to make sure their doors are closed. It's like I said, like if somebody wanted to and they had the ability, they could effectively put 100,000 gems in on Apple, and then take 100,000 out, lose 10,000, but cost Veve, 30,000. So Veve need to close those doors off. That's their operational risk. And there's easily measures that they can do inside of the MTL for that, but they have to consider every single thing before they take this next step. And it's going to take them time. Do I think it's going to be before this 30th of June? No, I don't. Not in respect of a full MTL release. A partial one, maybe a real basis, maybe say 10,000 clients.
Maybe KYC first.
KYC is a definite prerequisite for the MTL. That's going to be in every region, right? And that's part of an international anti-money laundering requirement. So some of these laws, if your country is in certain economic treaties, you just have to follow those rules. It's going to be a prerequisite. So everybody's going to have to identify themselves before they get a single dollar out. Right? And that's going to take time. And Veve itself is going to get flooded with people wanting to, identify themselves and get their money out. And once again, and probably not everybody wants to hear this, but Veve doesn't really need to cater that much to those people. Do you know what I mean? They're the fly-by-nighters. They're the people who have turned $100 or $50 into $3,000, and if they've done it right and they've been flipping, then I think Veve has to reward those guys. But if they've done it wrong and been off trading and made all their gems in the secondary market where Veve hasn't even been earning any income from what they've been doing. I mean, why would Veve care about those people? Why would they care about their complaints?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So going back to my question, when cash out is available, are you gonna take out some cash?
A little bit. Yeah. So it's going to depend on where the market is. So like I said, I'm not a very disciplined gem stacker. I will be down the track. I have to learn like everybody. And it is a discipline, because you see this stuff that you want, and if you've got the gems, you want to bloody buy it. Whereas what you may be better off doing is waiting. So look, if MTL came out right now, why the hell would you sell this stuff at this value for cash out when potentially you could hold it for another 3 or 6 months and that value could double or triple? And that's the reality of it. If you want to sell into a bear market just to get access to cash, that's going to depend on your situation. If you desperately need cash, then I can sort of understand that. But if you don't, and then you're just MTLing just to get some money back, and you're going to sell, something that was worth 2,000 for 400. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And then you believe that 2,000 is going to come back. Yeah.
100%. So let's talk about collectibles. Can you tell me the story so I have 3 collectibles that I want to ask you about. Let's talk about Donnie. How did you acquire the Donnie? Because Donnie is like the grail of the grail of the grail, because there are probably like 80 people who have Donnies now or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but that is one collectible that I'm very curious about.
Yeah, I don't know, like at a certain point in my Veve experience, and I guess in my life at the time as well, I was making some financial decisions that were either good or bad or indifferent. So I guess once I got started on the app, I sort of I learned what people were coveting and what looked good, and I don't have an attachment to the character historically. So it was more from a sort of selfish, egotistical sort of view. I thought, oh, I wonder if I could get it. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, I sort of designed and set out a pathway. If these things happened, I'd, you know, try to reach up. And when they did, I reached up and in a way sort of rewarded myself for it. Look, those sort of pieces, Donnie, you know, particularly some of those other really low ones from season 1, they're going to have to take Veve becoming a success story. And once again, the old Veve Netflix sort of comparison. This is my hope, and I don't know whether it's true or not. Right? I don't know whether this is realistic, but if Veve does take the pathway that we all believe in, or that I believe in, which is this sort of millions and millions of users, I do believe there will be some season 1 style recognition, you know, similar to, you know, both of my sons were sort of Fortnite players, and, you know, season 1 skins still now, people see them like, oh, that's from season 1. Do you know what I mean? I do think that this is a human and collecting sort of attribute that we want that original. And like, I actually wrote off to Veve recently and asked them to, you know, make the original versions of them, whether they be season 1 of Veve, season 1 of Golden Moments, season 1 of any particular of the intellectual properties, to identify them, to make them searchable by that sort of designation, to give them, you know, a different frame, so that people understand that, look onto the app now, they'll be able to work out what was season 1. You know, what was the first, because the first is important. And, you know, David's a massive collector. He's a legendary collector. So he understands how collectors feel and what they want. And this is what I think Veve, they might have to work within the constraints of where they are on Apple, and it might be a little bit more open on their webpage. But I think they need to sort of identify these particular things separately, so people have more value in them. You know, Golden Moments season 1 is Golden Moments season 1. It shouldn't be mixed in with the duets and, you know, the other stuff, or it should at least be sorted in order so people know where the top is. So, you know, if Golden Moments stays where it is or becomes 80 pieces, there has to be a way to identify this season 1. And I guess in a way, that's what I was hoping with Donnie as well, mate, because, you know, for me, everything is up for sale at all times. And
you bought it from the store, right?
Yeah.
So wait, so you bought Donnie from the marketplace? Sorry.
Yes, correct.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Big money.
Yeah. Painful.
Oh really? So did you sell collectibles to get there?
That one. But mate, you know, somebody, and people do, people all the time send me DMs on Twitter particularly, or, you know, Instagram, because they follow the sort of the movie Juvenile Delinquents on to Instagram, and they send me messages about, oh, you know, can I buy this or can I buy that? And, you know, I'm just like, look, mate, it's on the market. If you want to buy it, it's your choice, you know. Yeah. So for me, if Donnie went, I think I would regret it. I don't know. I would regret it if I didn't have an opportunity to buy it again down the track. And that's what happened. One of my favorite pieces is Rizzo. So I always go back to him when I'm talking. And I had a few of them, and I sold them, like I said, and the price kept going up and up. And it wasn't just the fact that I could have made more money if I had been a bit more patient. It was more that I just miss having my Rizzos.
Yeah. Let me tell you a Donnie regret story. I'm not sure if this person regrets Donnie's, but I have to tell you the story. Do you know Blockchain?
One of my friends mentioned her recently, and I think I might have even bought one from her. I don't know.
Yeah. So she's probably one of the first 10 Veve users. And at one point, she owned every single Donnie available on the market.
What?
Every single one. She owned 100% of the supply. 100%. That's what the rumors is. And I asked her about it. And that's what, hold on one second. Let me pull up the message because I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second. So she knows David personally. I've seen photos of her and Dr. Profit having video calls with David. So they are, where is it? 1 second. Give me 1 minute. Sorry, I have to pull it up. This is like golden. Where's So I asked her, Jane, did you have over 100 Donnies at one point? She said yes. At one point, she had 110. The company had 40. But she said, quote unquote, I listed some for cheap at the beginning. So she had 110 Donnies at one point.
Oh my goodness. I haven't heard that story. I'm happy that I have now. But look, this is something to draw a little bit of a line to this to potentially where Veve could end up. Okay. And this is where I think some people have to, she's obviously a smart person. She's got in and thought, you know what? This is a low edition number and people aren't treating it right. And I'm going to clean it up. All right. That's where Veve could be headed because, you know, I've looked at some of the items that I think are stronger than others. If, you know, depending on where the market is, if they reach a certain point, I just buy that because that shouldn't be below that price, right? And I don't know why people are selling, whether it's for Darth or whether it's for, you know, whatever was before Darth or whatever, you know, whatever the gem squeeze basis is. The fact is certain items I believe, fall below a point where you just have to buy them. You know what I mean? Because they shouldn't be at that value. So, but if Veve does become what it talks about, and this is another thing in regards to the investment, and, you know, David himself has mentioned that large institutional investors have eyed off Veve. And people are like, oh, where are they? You know, why is that money not flooding in? Well, you know, I think probably David, if he knows these guys, would be probably getting them to halt up that. He's probably not ready. He doesn't want to come in via the existing ones where they have to pay so much commission out. But I think secondary, and this is very, very important, this money is smart money, right? Smart money is not going to put a cent into a slanted game unless it's slanted in their favor, right? So they're not going to come into a game while there's this these gem markets going on where people are buying 30 and 40 cent gems. Why would they? Why would they come in and buy $1 gems and compete against people who are buying 30-cent gems? So there's not going to be any of that sort of institutional investment until Dan and David can guarantee the people who are looking to put in millions of dollars that this stuff is not going on. So they will have to have a mechanism in place, which is they'll probably quarantine those gems. They'll have to have a way of assuring that smart money that they're not facing odds against them, because otherwise the smart money is just going to stay away. But when the smart money is ready to come in, and people have seen this on the stock markets and even in some areas with, you know, the housing market in America where, you know, where they realize it's a red hot area, they'll come in, they'll buy 90% of the new houses in that area. And they'll do the same here, where they'll be like, look at this item, you know, just say once again, Rizzo or Donnie, you know, and I think we need to take a position here. We're going to take a position here. You talk about like Darth Vader fans stacking 10 Darths. They ain't going to stack 10 Darths. They're going to set a price. And this is what they do with stocks. So they take a longer term approach. So if they have a stock that they believe in, then if that stock is worth $1 at the time, they'll put in and say, well, we're taking a 5-10 year approach to this. We're going to put in a buy order, permanent buy order at 90 cents. So anytime it dips down, and they pick it up, right? They're the one who picks it up. And this is what they'll do with Veve. They'll be like, okay, what's the true value of Darth? What are we collecting it at? 2.5, 3.5? I don't know. But they'll get to a point where they think, well, if we can control a certain amount of the supply, we control the product. So if they accumulate 2,000 Darth over time, you ain't getting those until they become the price makers. Because if they think, okay, these things are going to be worth $10,000 from now, that's going to be the supply. And if somebody rushes through and tries to sell one at 6, they'll grab it. They'll bring that supply up because they control the supply, similar to what blockchain did. So she's just a early, like a precursor to what's going to happen, because she's shrewd, she's smart. This is the same as this smart money. They're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to come in and roll over some of these things and go, okay, that's illiquid anymore, because we're going to buy up every single one that is below this level. We're going to set up that level permanently. And they have the funds to take out something that, you look at the Givenchy stuff, they're only a 999. It's only 1,000 of them. It doesn't take that much money for an institution to come in and buy 400 of them. Now, because what happens is if 500 people or 600 people are already long-term holders on that item because they like that NFT, they don't want to sell it. They're going to hold on to it. They're not trying to make a buck on it. They want to own that NFT. They want to put it in their house. They want to put it on their TV. They want to put it in their Apple Watch, whatever. If they buy out the rest of it, the people who are flipping them and all that sort of stuff, eventually it's like, I always compare it to like a boat. When you see a boat on a mooring and the boat just moves back and forth on the rope, and the rope, goes tight and then, loops into the water. Eventually it just goes tight and that's it. And that's where you'll see those sort of January bull rush that happened here, mate, times 10, but because you won't be able to get the product. They'll grab it if it's too cheap, and then they're not going to sell it back to you for cheap. They'll set it, they'll target things like, well, I'm only guessing here, but they'll target things that, we consider grails or that are highly desirable, that, that would have historical importance. You look at something like the Mickey, the Steamboat Willie one. Yeah. Right? Hugely historical piece, right? You can't get any more historical inside Disney than that piece, right? Now, if they think that piece is worth $5,000, that they're going to, on the day that they activate that mindset and put that money in, they're going to buy every single one of them that's under $5,000, but they're not going to buy it all straight at once because they're too smart. They're going to take a long-term approach, and they'll just nibble at the ones that are sitting at $1,000 and $2,000. They'll just take those ones because they'll leave enough that people list in front of it. They'll just start acquiring. They're not going to come in on one day and just buy up the market like some other palookas have done on certain things. You know what I mean? Like they'll buy all the cheap ones, all the low-hanging fruit, and they'll keep that sort of supply. And what they even do in the stock market, which they may do here as well, is they may make it look like there is a selling pressure. This is what people have to be wary of, because this is what big business does. It comes in and says, okay, well, if I list 8 of these at 4,200, or, within 10% of that, people are going to keep jumping in front. All right. And this is, they don't want to sell it for 4.2. They just want to create like a wall, push people in front of it. Now, when another big business comes in and they know what's going on, they'll clean that wall up because they want it. And that's where it gets really interesting. It becomes, quite a game. But, when that smart money's in, this stuff could take off, man, like big time.
Yeah. I do have my opinion about that. But since we mentioned blockchain earlier, I just want to put out a sort of like an intro to, so I've been trying for months to get her on my channel, just like you. I know we've been talking since last year, right? I've been trying to get blockchain on my channel since February, but she's really busy. She travels all over the place. But the reason why I wanted to get her on is because she's extremely smart, right? Because she got into VV really early on. She's a really good collector because she has the adventure that season, the second set on VV, the adventure something set. She has all 4 collectibles, mint 18. And then DeLorean, she has mint 88. So if you've seen the movie, 88 miles per hour, that's when you travel through time, right? Yeah. So she's really good.
Nice.
And the craziest thing is she's Vietnamese.
Oh, so really?
The first time I heard about her, I was like, oh my God, who's this, crazy smart person who knows so much about VV and who has so much experience? And then I looked her up, and she has a Vietnamese last name, so we had that connection. She's a guest that I've been trying very hard to bring on, but she's really busy. But back to your point, I think talking about institutional money, that is somewhat similar to 2 things, which is what Dr. Profit is doing with Walt, with Secret Rare Spider-Man, with Donnie, is that he's been buying every single vault that goes below 7,000 gems, for example. So now he has like at least 160 the last time I saw it, vault. So I do agree that something similar will happen, and I don't think we're ready for that yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously he's a pretty switched on guy. And, he's been involved in some sort of financial business or financial markets historically, has a significant amount of wealth behind him. So yeah, he's an early sign of what's going to happen. What he's doing is smart, right? So, from my respects, hats off to him as well. But, what he's doing is, like I said, it's just an early sign of what's to come. And this is where if people take a long view of it, and Dr. Profit probably does have a long-term view of it, because why worry about the sort of ups and downs, and trying to convert little bits of profit when you can just hold. This is the one thing I think a lot of the VV early adopters were crypto people. And the difference between, I think, crypto people generally and other investors is crypto has this boom or bust attitude about it. It's either, it's a rug pull and it's going to go to zero, or it's going to go 500 times. And they don't always have the timelines right. So if you're going to take a longer term approach, you'll probably generally win more. You can't expect, you might get, but you can't expect like 100%, 200% returns in small time frames, because the most invested market is the stock market in any region, and they return 10, 12% over. When people expect 500% in a year, I mean, it sort of changes the way they behave and their expectations. And then when you get cooler, calmer people in, take Dr. Profit takes a long-term position. Like, other people will make smaller profits, other people will make losses, but over time, that's where really you're going to be able to reel that big fish in. You know what I mean? And he could end up with his whole portfolio being worth 5 times what he paid for it, maybe more, in the space of 2 or 3 years. And that's a huge win. And he'd be able to get out of that position, without a lot of difficulty, because they're highly desirable pieces. This is where the strategies are going to differ from person to person, but I can't fault him on his strategy there. It's a smart one.
Yeah, and then if you think about it, I think these institutional investors know about crypto, they know about NFTs, because just look everywhere. Like, companies are pouring billions of dollars into the metaverse, for example, right? So they wanted to get in, but they know that going back to your point, a lot of the NFT and crypto stuff is either boom or bust, right? And it's not really regulated. But when they know that there is a very credible name like Disney or Coca-Cola, they know that, okay, that is the route that we should go. Instead of putting $1 million to Disney stock that goes up hopefully 10-15% annually, right? They can make that bet, but on Veve Disney NFTs. And this the NFT is such a new field that the upside is way more than the stock market, but it still have that guarantee, that credibility from Disney. Just a different avenue of investing. That's what I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at, you know, Warren Buffett, the most successful investor of all time, and you know, he sort of always refers to only investing in things that he understands. And you know, he's not been a big supporter of this sort of crypto stuff, or but that basic principle of understanding. Now, if you don't understand that Disney products are desirable, then you don't understand much. Do you know what I mean? And if you have limited numbers of Disney products, then that becomes competitive. You know, I don't know, I'm not in America. I know, you know, that's probably the mainstay for Disney, but you hear things like, you know, they do like a very limited edition Disney Cup, and there's only 2,000, and people are queuing out the front for these things. Do you know what I mean? And they people on the second-hand market are selling them for 20 times what they bought it for. This is the stuff that Veve could be a big part of, and this Disney familiarity, it's its number one asset. And this is where the people are going to come in once the MTL is there, in whatever form it's there. That sort of becomes a trust element that, yes, okay, money in, money out, I get it. You put that with Disney, oh my goodness. I mean, the potential is unlimited. That statue, you know, Dr. Profit's been grabbing that statue. What was there? I think there's 4,333 of them. That is not a lot. Do you know what I mean? On a global scale. That might sort of sound like a little bit of a lot in our existing pool, but you times that by 100 and you bring in proper Disney people, like open up the whole Disney world. You know, that statue, I mean, you can't better that. Do you know what I mean? That has Walt holding, you know, Mickey's hand. That is the statue that people see when they go to Disneyland. And look, on that respect, I didn't really want to go too much into sort of my thoughts on tips or values of things, because I mean, that's for people to make their own opinion on. But if you were to ask me one thing that I think that's sort of going on right now that potentially could be important, for me, I think and I've always said this, the mother stamp, the first stamps that were on Veve, I think long-term, they're going to be very important. When the stamp world comes in, and it will come in, this is an official USPS NFT. It's the first time they've done it. It's the first set of stamps. There is the physical ones that relate to them that are going to be collectible. And this will be possibly a detachment from the value of the physical item versus the electronic item. I know this is a hot topic. You know, oh, this comic's worth that much, and you know, so the NFT should be worth this much. And look, I agree in principle with a lot of that stuff, but you look at something like that stamp, and you have the physical collector, which is just another Halloween style celebration. You know, like the USPS puts out annually stamps of, you know, at certain times of the year, Christmas stamps and, you know, Valentine's Day stamps or whatever. There's nothing that separates that particular physical stamp from the previous year's one, other than last year an NFT was made of that stamp. So the physical collectors of that may not be going out and grabbing it. I mean, if I was a stamp collector, I probably would grab some of those physical collectors. But when all of the stamp collectors who have, you know, years and years of stamp collecting behind them, find out that that is the first one that became an NFT,
yeah,
you know, there might be a situation where the electronic one influences the physical one more.
Yeah.
So,
the one that Veve has is the first USPS stamp, right?
yeah,
I
Day of the Dead.
didn't think too much about that, but that's a really good
Yeah,
point.
I honestly think that that one's, you know, when we're talking about historical sort of importance, that for me, I think that's a good one. And if you change it to something else, like maybe like more sort of, I don't know if this is popularity per se, but like eventually Veve hopes to have the interaction a lot more with its user base, so that they're inside some sort of world or sphere or whatever you want to call it. Now, people are going to have, I guess, maybe like houses or areas that are theirs that they decorate. Now, for me, I think the Star Wars posters, and you know, they're very early, and I don't know what's exactly going to happen with them. But if this world does take off, those particular posters, and you know, people who are in their 40s, you know, they grew up with those posters in their bedrooms, right? Then, like, my kids who are teenagers, I've bought those same posters for their bedrooms.
Oh, okay.
You know, that does make me a Star Wars fan. You know, we're a sort of a Star Wars fan family. Here I took my sons to the midnight screening on the first day and did all that sort of dorky stuff. But I think something like that, and even though there's a lot of those posters, you know, they're not high value at the moment, but I could imagine that reaching a point where people are like, well, I want all three of those posters in my Veve house. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Well, the other posters that will come out, but I think these are the original movie posters. And I think that's really, really cool.
And so comics too.
I think that could be a sleeper, that one. And yeah, like, I mean, the comics, I mean, I don't know that much about the Star Wars comic. I can understand why it's desirable, that's for sure. Because, I mean, one of the actual editions, I think, pretty much has the Star Wars poster on it. But, you know, when it gets to the point of having areas that other people will visit inside your online world, I don't know. I think some of these things might be more important than, but it'd be really cool. Like, see, that's my wall. That's my movie, The Juveniles and the Goods. That's my movie poster, right? I love that movie poster. Now, if you could frame, if I have a wall in Veve, I would put my posters on that wall. Does that make sense? Like, it's going to be, if you could have 80 items, you might have a world where you're only showing 40 or 30 or 80, I don't know, but it might be like too congested. You're going to have to maybe make decisions about what you do show, how you show it, what size you show it. Posters, I think, are going to be something that's going to be quite visible inside these, you know, this online world. And I don't know if it's the right poster. I think they could become desirable. I'm not saying to go out and buy Star Wars posters now, but I'm saying maybe these prices are cheap. You know, if you're a Star Wars person and you want Star Wars poster, now's probably the time to buy it, because when the world opens up to Veve and, you know, people are like, oh, those 3 posters are there. People aren't going to collect, I think anyhow. If you're a Star Wars fan, you don't collect just the one poster. You're going to collect all 3 of them. You're going to have them in order on your wall somewhere.
So you are obviously a Star Wars fan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know too much about Star Wars because it's just something that I didn't watch when I was younger. So that's why I'm very curious. So you probably have a few Darth Vaders?
No, I haven't bought the Darth Vader yet.
Why is that?
And that there is a reason behind that. I missed the bloody drop. The drops here in Australia are horrendous. I think it was at 1 a.m. here, and I got up and missed I hadn't gone for a drop in a while. I missed the buy button. I think I'm one of the only people who missed the Veda. And then I thought I had some gems available, and for me, and this is my strategy, people can do what they want, but for me, something like a Veda coming in provides an opportunity for me to buy other stuff.
Right.
Does that make sense? So
okay,
I would think long term, it's better off buying an item that was historically 1,000, that's now down to 250. I would buy that item, and then over time, hope to sell those items at a profit and acquire Veda as it goes through its own peaks and troughs.
Yeah, that is that is a really good point. That makes me feel better because right after the drop, Veda was like 800 gems. I talked to another whale, the Todd Father, that's his Twitter name. He got one for 650.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah. He's really awesome. He has some really big plays. He has like 4,000 NFTs right now, so definitely like a huge.
He's another one that was in very early and acquired a considerable amount of cheap NFTs. And like I said, like, you have to take your hat off and give him credit for doing that, because, you know, whilst other people are, you know, walking around picking up the odd daisy from the ground or something, they've just made a committed effort and put money behind what they believed in, and just went bang, acquired. And if you scattergun grabbed all of that stuff at the time when he was able to get the stuff, and I'm sure he was buying a lot of the stuff from the store.
Let me tell you a story about him. The reason why I was so interested in his name, Steven. Steven, his Twitter name is the Todd Father. Everybody knows him. Is that last August, late August, Omi was at 0.008. It was really high. The price was really high, right? So, and he sold 40 million Omis. Like his whole Omi bag, he sold every single token at 0.008, which is a really good price looking back.
Yeah.
And he put, that was like probably like $330,000. He put all of that into buying collectibles in August and September. And back then, Superman was less than 1,000. Todd Batman hover around 1,600 gems. Yeah. So he made, and I thought he was crazy. I thought that I just couldn't understand it. Now looking back, that was a really, really good move. That was like a genius move right now, because Omi is 0.0014 maybe at this point in time. So he bought everything. He took the gigantic risk of selling Omi when the sentiment was really high.
Yeah.
And bought collectibles, and now he's doing really well.
Yeah, great moves. Honestly, you know, hat off to him. Well done. And this is the thing, you know, for me, there's a lot of people inside the Veve family that I love. And, you know, I'm happy to say, you know, well done. You know, if you make the right moves, that's great. You know, the only problem I ever have is with some of the shysters. And, you know, for me, if somebody has bought 20 gems off the market because they needed it or whatever, I don't give a crap about that sort of stuff. It's when people pretend to be community leaders or influencers that I have a problem with it. And, you know, even with that, I like some of them. So, I mean, there's a lot of likable people inside this Veve family. And I think when somebody does something like that, we have to say, mate, well done, you know, good on you, Todd Father. You know, I'm happy for those people who have done all this stuff, and they're important success stories in this early stage. Do you know what I mean? It's nice for people to know that smart moves can be done and that people are doing them. And look, they're the people to, I think, to listen to. If they're doing the right things, that's great. I mean, if people want to take financial advice from somebody that looks like they should be, you know, or does work in Walmart, you know, it's a bit risky. You know, if they have a thorough understanding of, you know, what they're talking about, that's great. But when they're just like firing off 4,000 pieces of advice and, you know, one of them comes true, just everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. You know what I mean? Like, I think people should listen, learn. There's a lot of online information about, you know, strategies, tactics, short-term, long-term. There's a lot of good stuff around, but people, you know, obviously need to make their own decisions and work out how trustworthy, not only just the integrity of the person, but how reliable the stuff is that they say. And, you know, I think a few of the people on here, if you look back historically, what they've done or they've said, you know, if you listen to them at the time, their decisions and advice, you would never listen to them again. Whereas, like, I'm really happy to hear the Todd father did that, and mate, that from my perspective, which means I would listen to him more. Do you know what I mean? He has a good finger on the pulse, a good gauge of markets and understanding of sentiment, and, you know, the matrix and the mechanics behind it. Obviously, he's a smart person. You should listen to people who've made money, not people who've thrown out, regurgitated like freaking 400 ideas and one of them's worked, and then they stick to that one idea. And if you actually balanced out the other 399 crap piece of advice that they give you, you'd be a loss all day, every day.
Yeah. So we just went through only half of my questions, but it's
how long have we been going for?
Almost 2 hours, but we will have to do part 2 of this conversation because I want to ask you about your secret rare Spider-Man, your number 54 Todd Batman, and your thoughts on the Omi tokens. So I hope to do a second conversation with you, if you allow.
See you in 9 months.
2023. But before we end this conversation, can I ask you 2 more questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. What are the 3 things? So let me say the questions first, and then you can pick whatever order you want to go with.
Yeah.
What are the 3 things that you would tell a new user who are just getting started on Veve? And then my second question is, for that same person who's just getting started with 1,000 gem budget, which 3 NFTs would you recommend that person to take a look at? Not to buy, because we don't want to get into financial advice, but 3 NFTs that if you were just getting a new account, 1,000 gems, what would you do?
Yeah.
So those 2 questions.
Okay. So, you know, if you're getting into Veve, you have to make a decision whether you're getting into Veve to acquire things that you want. I mean, if you have an interest in a certain thing, then that's what you buy. It doesn't matter. You might be able to find a better time to buy that particular item. You know, you might have to wait, or, you know, jump in right now. But it doesn't really matter, because that's the NFT that you want. You know, and there are going to be a lot of people on Veve who are just like that. And this is really what the market majority is for. And this is what, you know, David said many times, this is collectors. It's for collectors. If you were saying to somebody, hey, look, you can come into this and, you know, have a bit of fun and try to make some money. I mean, that's like a hobby. Do you know what I mean? Where if you're, you know, whether you're making clay objects or whatever, you have a little bit of a side hustle, gig, whatever you want to call it. You want somebody to say, look, don't look at just what you like. Consider what potentially has the most upside. You know, you provide different advice. If I was to provide that upside advice right now, well, like I said, without providing financial advice, I think long term, that Day of the Dead, the mother stamp, I think that potentially is a massive sleeper. Oh God, I didn't have a think about this. Maybe I think I think she's down at the moment, down to about like 500, would be the Becky Cloonan or the Joe Mad parts of that first Batman set, because I think that's going to be an important set. And I think owning those items are going to be a bit of a sort of a, you get kudos for it. So I don't know. Let me have a quick look. I'll open up my app. If I was to provide that advice, look, I think the Ultraman basics, I think that one's really heavily undervalued. If you, I think the one thing for people to consider is with Veve is as it expands, you're going to have an increased amount of products available. And if you look at sort of the history of Veve and where it is now and where it's going to be, like certain products, like just say Big Barda, right? Now, not a lot of people would have known about that character, Big Barda, but she was out very early on the app. Now, when she came out, and then, in that sort of first stage of Veve getting a lot more users, it's like an atom, sort of smashing around the place. And the interest there's only 10 things to